Good morning. The past year or so has been probably at a professional level the least productive year I've had in terms of my career. At least the last 8 years of being a neurologist post-training with, I've spent less time writing papers, focused on professional growth. I did change jobs and made some pivots with that. I did give up a lot of ambitions because I'm seeking something different and still figuring that out. So I've been professionally less productive this past year, but trying to reframe and reorient myself. And so part of this is getting into a lot of stuff I've been putting off. So one of the books that I have wanted to read for the longest time, and I haven't because I know it's a tough book and it's something you got to grapple with, is Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning, the Architecture of Belief. This has been on my radar for years, ever since I understood who Jordan Peterson was and have been compelled by him. I did read 12 Rules for Life, which astounded me when I read it. And I knew that a lot of his foundational thoughts and come from 12 Maps of Meaning. And I knew I wanted to get into it, but honestly, I put it off for so long, and it was a lot of stuff. I mean, it was like there are papers I need to write, there are grants that I need to put in, there are patients I need to see, there are, my family is growing. There's a lot of things that where I put off reading that book. And I knew it's just not an easy read. It's not something you can just run and put on Audible. I mean, it is available on Audible, but you just can't. It's not the type of book that you can read and grapple with and understand at a deep level without studying it. It's a book worthy of study. I mean, if you don't study it, you're just getting words in and out. And I try to actually listen to parts of it in my car on Audible, and it's just I'm not absorbing this. It was really a book that every 15 to 20 minutes was wrestling my mind around certain concepts and writing things down. And at times I got frustrated because I really wanted to, because I had other things I want to do in my life, and I just struggled to get past it. Anyhow, I finally finished it this morning. And I just think this book touches on. This book touches on what's the meaning of life. Maps of Meaning, the Architecture of Belief. And Jordan Peterson gets at it at a really deep level at what is our, what is our neurophysiologic and underlying psychological basis for how we confront anomalies, how we confront chaos, how we confront novelty. Some of this makes a lot of sense to me as a neurologist and as a researcher in consciousness. For those who don't know, I do have been doing research in children with disorders of consciousness in intensive care unit settings, where we try to look at, we change tones and offer verbal commands, where we try to identify whether we can identify, based on brainwave patterns, biomarkers that reflect unconscious, subliminal, or conscious processing. So the whole idea, these are event-related potentials, based upon neural correlates of consciousness, which I've discussed in other videos, more didactic videos, which have to do with ideas surrounding the global neuronal workspace theory. There's also recursive processing theory and information integration theory that, have some elements that are consistent with it. But just to tie this all back, Jordan Peterson, he gets into that. He takes things from that level at a physiologic basis, and with pretty, as a neurologist I can say, with some pretty good consistency, and brings in psychological concepts from Carl Jung and others, and adopts this position that we are wired toward meaning. We are wired toward belief. We are drawn into it. It is part of who we are. And the heroic journey is to, come from the structure and culture and order that we arise from, to identify flaws within it and anomalies, to recognize that there is a shadow and there is a chaos, the dragon of chaos, and to lean into that and to recognize that with maturity and to identify that which can make your structure and your culture better, and to come back and to forge as a hero a better world. That's essentially the hero's journey. He also puts forth that this is played out across many different cultures and many different mythologies, and has unbelievable comprehension and clarity as it relates to the Christ story in Christianity. So I think it's an incredible book. I think it's worth studying. I don't want to say it's worth reading, because this is something you can't just put on Audible and just go through. Like, you need to grapple with it, wrestle with it, and unfortunately it's going to take you a lot of time. It took me a lot of time, more time than I wanted it to, but I mean, I think that's the reality of things that are worthwhile, is that you're going to struggle through it before you come out of it. And I am absolutely sure I'm going to go through this book again, because it's not something you can just read at one time and totally comprehend. But, one of the things with reading 12 Rules for Life, with listening to Jordan Peterson, and with grappling, as I was progressing through Maps of Meaning, I mean, one of the things that I've been very confused by him, and I'm starting, is, whether he actually believes in God, because this is something that's been, people have debated with him about, and he has given answers that, just are, for me, have historically sounded very confusing. You can find some videos of it where he talks about, like, he brings the question back to the person asking him, like, what do you believe? What is belief? And it almost seems like it's antagonistic or being circular or not answering the question. And I found, like, his responses in the past very frustrating, but I'm starting to, honestly, this book, the question that he asks, what do you believe? I mean, it's a complicated question, and he writes an entire, 480 plus page book that struggles and wrestles with the concept of what is belief. So when people ask, what do you believe? He's like, well, what do you mean by belief? Or what do you believe? I mean, and he says it's hard to answer the question, and I get it. I get it now, because, he shows through 485 pages that I struggled with, like, how hard it is to understand the concept of belief. So it's just, I mean, I get it now. I get it now, at some level. It's not a simple, the question of what you believe is not a simple question. It's not a simple question. It's not what you say, it's what you do. And I've alluded to that before. Nobody cares what your opinion is. Nobody cares what God you claim to believe in. What do you do? What do you do? What you do matters, not what you claim your belief is. And some of Jordan Peterson's response to some individuals about whether he believes in God or not are more profound to me now. One of the things that he's known to say about the idea of, do you believe in God? One of the responses that he's given is, no, but I am afraid that he may exist. And that totally confused me and seemed like paradoxical when I first heard it, and was kind of annoyed by it, but now I get it. I get it when you put it into context, that what you believe is what you do. For someone like Jordan Peterson, he acknowledges, like all of us, that we are mortal, that we are vulnerable, that we are flawed, that we make mistakes. It is in that light that we are not. It is in those actions that are fallible and flawed and incoherent with attaining a higher ordeal and attaining yourself to God, that you are not acting in accordance with believing in God. And in the sense of that, he is, when he says that, does he believe in God? And he says no, but he's afraid he might exist. He is acknowledging that he doesn't always act, Christ-like. He doesn't always act, nor do any of us, because we all are flawed and mortal, and make mistakes, and in the religious sense, sinful. And when he says no, he doesn't. Nobody's afraid he might exist. He acknowledges that he is not always living in a Christ-like manner, but he does have the fear of God, and he does have the fear of his own mortality, and the fear of not living, fully oriented toward, a higher calling and a higher good. And in that sense, his answer totally makes sense, and is very honest. And I think it's okay to say you struggle with the idea of if you believe in God, especially when you take into context. I will say I struggle with the belief in God. I think when you take into context what it means to live well, what it means to live a moral life, we're not. I think most of us can acknowledge we're not really perfect at that. I think we can. And so when you acknowledge that, you have to, it comes across as arrogant to say that you do believe in God, because you are not, because in that sense, when you say that, you're not does that mean you're always acting, you're acting well in accordance with moral value? It's a totally, I think it's a question to struggle with. I think one of the things he says in the book is it's easier to build a city than build yourself, and I think that's true, and it alludes to my prior video on don't save the world, save your world, right? I mean, that's what people do. They focus on something external to them and complain about it, and do all sorts of crazy things and honestly dishonest things. Like I said, Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. I mean, the tactics there are not very Christ-like. They're not very moral, but they're effective if you want to if you want to reorder the world external to yourself. But this is not in line with who you are. But I mean, there's just a lot. It's a lot harder, and it's a lot more worthier to focus on your life and to focus on making yourself a more moral person and a better person for the world. So it's okay to say, I think it's okay to say that you struggle with living, that believing in God. Doesn't mean that you don't orient yourself to God or follow God, but that you're being honest with yourself in terms of how well you're doing that. And I think that's where I understand where he's coming from. And I also I think it is, belief is very complicated in terms of its architecture, and in terms of what we're understanding about the nature of volition and intellectual processing and decision making. And that's where Jordan Peterson actually has a very unique distinction from religious individuals, because he is a scientist, and he does have a background with a strong in psychology, as well as I'll say as a neurologist and a clinical physiologist. He's pretty good at neurophysiology, especially as it relates to event-related potentials and the dynamics of subliminal and conscious processing. He gets that. And so he has a very nuanced and complicated viewpoint of what it means to make a decision, what it means to have subliminal processing of fear, of venturing into the unknown, fear of going against the tribe, courage to do the right thing in the setting of fear and shame that you might go against the tribe. He gets that at a neurophysiologic level, and I think that's where And that's where I think, there are even religious people that are struggle with Jordan Peterson in terms of how he grapples with belief. But I think if you understand the neurologic basis of decision making and thought processing and belief, I think he makes a lot of sense. And it may be the most profound book I've read, and it really draws on me, just being a neurologist and neurophysiologist, that some of this is confusing to others, but actually it's starting to make sense to me, just because I have that little bit of specific knowledge that's within these domains. So I think this is profound. I'd recommend grasping with the book Maps of Meaning. I think it's okay to struggle with your belief in God as long as you know what the belief is, as long as you have an orientation of what belief is, and that it doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter what you say. It matters what you do. That's what belief is. It's in what you do. That reveals who you are, not what you say. So orient yourself to a higher good and act accordingly. So have a great morning. We'll talk again soon.